Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, welcome everyone for this extraordinary special session of Isogeny Club seminar. And today we are lucky enough to have Dr. Andrea Basso, who's a postdoc here at, or not here, but almost here at IBM Zurich. So yeah, please take it away, Andrea.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me, for having me here. Today, I would like to tell you a little bit about a recent project that I call poke, like the Hawaiian dish, which is a framework or like a generic tool that we can use to build different things. And in particular, in this work, we build a pretty efficient public key encryption protocol, but we also obtain a split KEM and an OPRF. And we'll get to what those means, later on in the presentation, if that doesn't make too much sense for you. But if we take a very brief, quick look at the history of isogeny-based cryptography, at least the non-group action-based one, we see that back in 2011, SIDH was proposed, and it was the first somewhat practical, efficient isogeny-based protocol. And from then we had a good decade. We had a good run. For 10 years, we had new constructions, new protocols that built upon it. We have all sorts of developments. And then in the summer of 2022, in the infamous summer of cryptanalysis, SIDH got completely broken because we obtained a full key recovery attack. It was proposed in 3 breakthrough papers. And since then, the solution, the results of these attacks has kind of been twofold. On one hand, there have been works that took these new attacks and tried to use them constructively. These attacks are so efficient, so fast that we can actually use them inside protocols to our own advantage. And this led to the development of key signing HD, but also FESTA and its QFESTA variant, a lot of other HD variants, and so on. At the same time, there was a parallel direction of work that was somewhat very distinct, and it was working on countermeasures. SIDH still had, because there was so much work that relied on SIDH, and because there was so much research that had taken place on SIDH, it made sense to try to save it somehow. So there have been work like MSide, MDSide, and the binary ternary version of SIDH that tried to retain SIDH as it was, but doing some modifications that allowed to avoid the scope of the SIDH attacks. And these two directions have been kind of going further away from each other, in the sense that the constructive applications that relied on a higher dimensional or things on like all the HD protocols kind of stepped away from the framework of SIDH, from having a commutative diagram, and at the same time, the countermeasures that relied on SIDH stayed reliably on dimension 1 and did not use any of the techniques introduced in the SIDH attacks. There is a partial exception, which is IceCube by Tomoki, where there was a commutative diagram that was built that somewhat resembles SIDH using higher dimensional techniques, but this was still like looking quite different from SIDH. So the goal of this work is to somehow try to merge the two approaches and try to bring the higher dimensional techniques that have been introduced in the last year or two and try to make it work in the SIDH framework and see what we can obtain from that. And in some sense, this work doesn't contain any really new idea. There's nothing that doesn't exist, but it's just like bringing different ideas together and seeing what we can obtain when we try to combine things that haven't been combined before. Okay, so just as a quick reminder, since we're going to be talking quite a bit about it, this is what SIDH kind of looked like. we started from 2 set of points PQ of co-prime order, and then the two parties computed two isogenies by taking a linear combination of this and publishing the images of these points, reveal the codomain of their isogenies together with these images, one public key here and one public key up there. And then because of this information, everyone could compute the push forward of these isogenies, could compute a parallel isogeny so that they could form this commutative diagram. And then both parties could compute this curve down here, which then acts as the shared secret. And this works, this is a commutative diagram, because this relationship between the kernels of the isogenies is satisfied. Like each isogeny has a kernel that, phi prime, the one at the bottom, the kernel of that isogeny is the image of the kernel of the top isogeny under the secret isogeny of the other party, and vice versa. And this will maybe work. And then, as well known in 2022, this was dramatically broken by the so-called SIDH attacks. They come in different forms, in different shapes, but for the most part, we just kind of abstract them away in a big black box or a blue box. For what matters, we basically, this is just like a big algorithm that takes an input two curves, the domain and codomain of an isogeny, its degree, and then two set of points and the images of these points. And then if these are sufficiently large, then this can spit out an isogeny in some cases. And even when this is not possible, it still gives us an algorithm to evaluate the isogeny phi on any point of our choice, which in some sense is the representation of the analysis. Like meaning knowing an isogeny really means being able to evaluate it on any point that we have, and this is precisely what it does. So while this tool, this black box, was initially proposed for destructive application to break SIDH, it led to the so-called higher dimensional representation of alphabet. So say that we have an isogeny phi, and between two curves E0 and E1, then we can always represent, regardless of its degree or regardless of other things, by basically this information. If we give the two curves E0 and E1, PQ, and the degrees, and the images of P and Q under phi, if these points are sufficiently large, and we give the degree of phi, then this is a representation of an isogeny in the sense that it allows us to evaluate this isogeny on any other point of our choice. And we call this then a higher dimensional representation. But first of all, this is the general theory, but in practice, if we want to make this efficient, what we really want is the degree of this isogeny have a specific shape. It has to be the product of two values such that the sum of these two values is power of 2, which is very restrictive because usually like this, like isogenies of this shape are quite rare. But if we do, then we can obtain a very efficient representation. And this also allows us to obtain to represent it using smaller points P and Q by representing it with like we only need a degree of the order of P and Q to be roughly the same size as Q, which is roughly the square root of the degree. Okay, so this is a possible representation, but we can also start playing around with it. Because, for instance, we could represent this by scaling these 2 points, P and Q, and including alpha and beta in our representation. If what we had before was a representation, then this also works because knowing alpha and beta, we can simply remove those scaling and we're back where we were before. So why would we even care about something like this? The reason is that now we can keep alpha and beta secret and maybe even the degree secret, and then we can reveal some information that we make it public, we let everyone know this, and then other people can manipulate this, can do things without actually being able to recover the isogeny phi, but we do have some secret information that allows us to modify whatever we have and obtain something that allows us to know phi and evaluate phi on any point of our choice. And this brings us to the sort of the main tool, the main thing that we're using in this work. And because we said at the beginning, we wanted to try to make this higher dimensional representation work in an SIDH-like framework where we have commutative diagrams and push forward. So if given an isogeny like this, and which we can like given this sort of a higher dimensional representation, how do we push this? How do we compute the push forward this under some other isogeny? And the idea is that assuming that we have some method to compute an isogeny psi here, we can reveal the images of these points P0, P0, scaled under some value beta and beta inverse, or like beta and gamma, just two random values. And we do the same thing on the right side, assuming that psi and psi prime are parallel. Right now, it doesn't really matter how we are going to do that. We just assume that we have a way to do this. And if we do this, then what we're saying is that we also make sure that on this side, we reveal the images of PA and QA scaled by the same values. And as far as we know, revealing this information is safe, is secure, because now these points are scaled. So as far as we know, this is not attackable by the SIDH attacks. And indeed, the security of many or some existing protocols like FAST and QFAST depends precisely on the hardness of this problem. But if you look, what we get is that the images, like if there is, so now because these two things are parallel, then there should exist another isogeny phi prime going from the bottom to isogenies that we can call phi prime. And if you look at what happens when we compute the images of these points PP and QP that are being revealed, what we get is that this is the composition then of phi and psi, just scaled by beta and beta prime, beta inverse. And then we simply move the betas out, which means then we get the images of P0, but then if you have the bottom line, we can also traverse from the top line, from going applying phi first and then psi, which then basically we just rewrite what we have up there. And then we get that, so the images of PB and QB under psi prime is precisely these 2 points scaled by the inverse of the scaling that we had up there. And this is pretty much what we wanted, because then it means that whoever knows the top isogeny and also knows alpha and gamma can take these bottom points, rescale them, and then obtain a representation of phi prime, which means that they can then recompute phi prime. Does this make sense so far? Cool. And some similar technique was also proposed in Isocube. And this allows us to basically push a higher dimensional representation of isogeny under some isogeny psi, with both isogenies still being secret to the general public and only being known to the respective parties. And this is great, because this looks a lot more like SIDH. This is exactly what we wanted, right? But the catch is that in SIDH, the shared secret was this curve down here. But now we are revealing it to make this thing work. The issue is that this kind of thing cannot really work if we only reveal the curve and the points on the left. So the way that we make this work and we can obtain some kind of shared secret is that we take everything as it is, but then we need to introduce something else. We introduce an additional point that we call x0 on the starting curve, and then we request that both parties reveal the scaled image of this point. So in this case, we obtain a point xa from the image under phi, and we obtain xp under the bottom isogeny. Sorry, the vertical isogeny. And then both parties can obtain the same shared secret, being the image of xp under phi prime scaled by the same gamma, or equivalently the image of xa under psi prime scaled by the same lambda gamma that was delta that was used there. And so this sort of gives us a general framework that allows 2 parties to obtain a shared secret. And the reason why I'm talking about a framework and not a specific protocol is because we haven't really defined how we compute psi and psi prime. We can have different type of isogenies there, but also the way this was presented was using a higher dimensional representation for phi and phi prime, and that's how we're going to use it in practice. But we can also imagine different types of representations there, both higher dimensional, like at different dimensions, but even in one dimension, we could have a representation using two curves. So this is the generic idea, but then it can be implemented or instantiated with different isogenies of our choice. And one thing that one might wonder is like, sure, like we might assume that the underlying thing is secure, but now all of a sudden we're revealing a lot more information. So does it still, like, does revealing these additional points keep the security? And at least intuitional level, the answer is yes, because of too many reasons. One is that these points are being scaled on both sides. So this is not fundamentally different than what we were already doing, where we were already scaling the points under some scalar. But also because in practice, we will take this point x0 to have an order that is a large-ish prime. So because we never need to compute any isogeny where x determines the kernel, this can be easily a large prime number without affecting the efficiency of the protocol. And this means that it gives us more confidence in its security, because even if these points were not scaled, we were just revealing their torsion in the clear, then we still wouldn't know how to use them. One, because the SND stacks require 2 points, and we don't know how to go from 1 to 2 points if the order is prime. But even if we're then computing these these higher dimensional isogenies that we use in the attacks of a large prime degree, will still be way too costly. So we don't expect that introducing these additional points really affect the security, because we have sort of like 2 levels of security given by this, and each one of them should be enough to make sure this is secure. Okay. Any questions so far on how this general thing look like? Go for it.
Yeah, this was how phi actually parallel to phi, right?
Yeah, no, that's we'll get to there in a moment, but like you can choose different things depending on how you want to do it. Okay, so then we can the maybe most important thing, the reason for the name. So this PKE stands for point-based key exchange, because we do introduce this additional point everywhere. That's where the name comes from. And okay, so then we can go to the first construction, which is this PKE. And we can start from the key generation. And basically what we're going to do is obtain an isogeny of degree q times 2 to the a minus q, because we've seen that that's what gives us the most efficient representation. The idea is that we start from a curve with 2 sets of points. The orange points have order 2 to the a big power of 8 or big power of 2, and the blue points have are a big power of 3. Then we sample a random value q in the range from 0 to the lambda, and then we generate an endomorphism that looks something like this of degree q times 2 to the a minus q times 3 to the b. And because the starting curve is, we choose the curve 1728, where we know the endomorphism ring, we know everything, and it's a particularly nice endomorphism ring, we can easily generate endomorphisms of the right shape. But then because this endomorphism is the product of these 2 values, q times 2 to a minus q on one side and 3 to the b, it means we can split this into 2 isogenies, one psi of degree 2 to the b, and one isogeny phi of degree q times 2 to the a minus q. So because we know how the endomorphism acts on the blue points on the 3 to the b torsion, it means that we can extract the kernel of psi. And once we have psi, then we can compute the images of the orange points under psi and scale them appropriately to obtain the images of phi on PQ on this some random curve in the middle. And this is precisely a representation, a higher dimensional representation of phi, because we know the starting curve, we know the end curve, which is the codomain of psi. We know how it acts on large points P and Q, and we know its degree because we construct like that. So this gets a way to compute an isogeny of the degree that we want, and we automatically obtain a higher dimensional representation. So then the entire PKE is going to be quite similar, quite an instantiation of the framework that we've seen before, using on the one end these higher dimensional representations, and on the other we're just going to be using good old SIDH isogenies. So we start with 3 sets of points, those of order 2 to the A, those of order 3 to the B, and then our X point of order X, which again is a large-ish prime. We then generate an isogeny of degree Q to the A minus Q, like we've seen in the previous slide. And then we reveal this information, which I can appreciate is quite a lot. So we take the points P and Q and we reveal their images scaled under some diagonal matrix. We scale them alpha, like one point by alpha and the other point by some alpha prime. We reveal the images of the blue torsion under scaled by some scalar, both B and B, like this is the same on both ends. And then we scale the image of X scaled by some third other value. And this is significant because so far of all the different type of, or not all, but most type of protocols that came after SHTAX always try to stay away from scaling 2 values with the same scalar B, beta, as in this case, because this is usually quite risky. And the only exception is M side and M beside, but there they have other ways to guarantee security. But in this case, the security really hinges on the fact that degree of phi is unknown, because Q is sampled randomly during the key generation. So this is not something that is publicly available. And that means that even if you reveal 2 points under some just scaled by the same scalar, this is enough to hide the degree of the isogeny, but this is still good enough to let us compute SIDH style isogenies. So on one end, we can, like to encrypt, we can compute an isogeny psi by just taking a linear combination of P and Q, and then we do the same with the images P and QA. And because we scale both points just by the same beta on both ends, we obtain 2 parallel isogenies. And then here what we do is that we, exactly as in the framework, we reveal the images of P and Q and PAQA scaled by some different scalars. And because of what we've seen before, this gives us a commutative diagram, and this allows the party that knows the degree of phi, that knows Q and the scaling values, to obtain a representation of phi prime. And once they have that, then both parties can obtain the same value XAB, which can then be used to encrypt a message by the sender. So this is how the PKE looks like and how it works. In terms of security, the actual problem that we're relying on is the hardness of computing this point XAB, given all the information that is public. The information on that curve, the information on this curve, and the information on that curve down there. But while this is the formal security assumption that we need to obtain a PKE that is in CPA secure, in practice, the question that we're asking ourselves, that we're looking at, is whether is 2 different types of assumptions. One is whether it's secure to reveal this information down here and down there, given the information up there and up there. Basically, it's asking, is it secure to have this smooth degree isogenies by revealing this diagonal matrices, this images scaled by diagonal matrix. And as far as we know so far, this is secure. This has been, again, this has been used in FESTA, QFESTA, but also Binside and other constructions. And as far as we know, there is no way to modify the SIDH attacks to cover these cases. And the other big assumption is the one that protects the security of the isogeny phi, which basically asks whether it's hard to recover phi given all this information. And in practice, it really boils down to whether it's secure to reveal the images of 2 points as they are, or just over the same scalar, as long as the degree of the isogeny is secret. And this is a relatively new assumption in some sense. It's somewhat similar to the assumption in mass degree SIDH and DSIDH, because there also isogenies of hidden degree are used, but the context is very different because in this case, the degree is sort of like, it can be anything as long as it's of that shape, whereas in the other context, there has to be a multiple of the degree is known, so that allows certain type of reductions that are no longer possible here. And there is also a, so if you put all of this together, we can actually obtain a concrete protocol with parameters and everything. And what we see is that we need the order of the torsion points of the power of 2 to be roughly 2 to the lambda, because that's determines the size of the Q that we use on the degree, which so like we're basically by choosing lambda there means we have 2 to the lambda options for Q, which guarantees enough searching space for the degree. And then we need the degree of the smooth isogenies to be a power of 3 that is roughly 2 to the 2 lambda, so that this prevents meet in the middle attacks like we used to have in SIDH. And then we take a point of order x to be roughly, to have order roughly 2 to the lambda over 2. This is enough to prevent brute force attacks because there are roughly 2 to the lambda points of that order, and we require that to be prime to give us sort of additional security. But interestingly, we can take a prime of this form, 2 to the a, 3 to the b times f minus 1, because we can, since we can take the point x, since it doesn't have to be smooth, it can be like a large prime, to be sort of, to live on the b side, to be dividing p minus 1 rather than p plus 1. And this means that we can obtain something quite small with a prime that is roughly 3 lambda bits. And while this is quite small even by isogeny standards, yesterday in one of the discussion, we managed, and especially Michael managed, to find parameters that would actually allow us to move even more torsion to the p minus 1 side and obtain parameters that lead us to having a prime of size 2 lambda, which, as far as I know, would be the first PKE to use such a small prime. And there is also a very non-optimized, very proof of concept implementation written in Sage that gives us some quite encouraging results, because encryption and decryption take less than 200 milliseconds on my laptop here. And one caveat is that this implementation doesn't include the compression techniques. So the size that you see on the left are not corresponding to this implementation. This would require a little bit of work, but at the same time, there is plenty of room for improving this optimization. Plenty of room for optimizations of this implementation besides the usual going from Sage to a low-level language. So we can expect, or at least hope, to get something that is quite compact in size and still like pretty efficient on the computation side. Okay, any questions on the PKE? Otherwise, I'll move forward to the next construction. All right, then this is good. As in, like, we got something that if you spin hard enough, it basically looks like SIDH. But then the question is, does this still gives us the same things that we could get from SIDH? And one of the nice things that we could get from SIDH was a non-interactive key exchange. the key exchange by itself was only passively secure. If you wanted active security, you need to add additional proofs of knowledge, but you still got something that was a non-interactive key exchange. And what's the non-interactive key exchange? It's a protocol that looks like a classic PP-Hellman, where two parties run key generation. It spits out secret keys for each party and a public key for each party. And then once these two public keys are exchanged, we don't need any new fresh communication. Both parties could non-interactively run algorithms that took into consideration only their secret key and the other party's public key to obtain a shared secret. And this is still quite useful because, for instance, it provides deniable authentication, which is something that is used in Signal and other messaging protocols, and it's particularly hard to obtain, to reconstruct in the post-quantum setting. And clearly, what we just had cannot hope to replicate this because we need to send two messages, and the second message depends on the public key. So we don't really have anything like this. But interestingly enough, there is a recent work from 3-4 years ago that actually shows that for most things, including, for instance, denial authentication used in messaging applications, we don't need non-interactive key exchanges. What we need is a split KEM, which is something very similar, but it just allows a little extra bit of communication. The idea is that we don't we enable one extra message of communication. So we replace this. We basically replace this arrow with something that is actually produces a second message that we call message B, and then this is being sent to the first party, and then this also spits out a shared secret. So far, this is not very different, but then the main difference is that the shared secret algorithm that the first party runs now doesn't only take into consideration the public key B, but also take into consideration this this new message. So we allow one extra message of one extra round of communication, and this is actually great because this is exactly the situation we're in. So we can hope that what we have, the PKE that we just seen, gives us a split cache, and then we're good.
So message B is the output of the vertical arrow to the right, right?
Ooh, sorry, say that again.
So message B is the output of
Yes.
the SSB.
Yes, exactly.
But it's also the output of SSA in your picture, right? So there's somehow, what's the output of SSA is supposed to be?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the airing, I don't know. Like the main idea is that now your SSB spits out a message B and a shared secret, and then you have the shared secret algorithm that takes into consideration the message and it spits out a shared secret. Yeah, I mean the picture. I don't think there is a good pictorial representation of this split KEM. But it kind of works because then it kind of translates to our setting.
But then since the output of SSA should be the same of SSB, isn't the only implementation possible that SSA just takes the message B and output it?
No, because you still want it to be secure, right?
Yeah, but you need this to be equal to message B.
No, sorry. This SSB also produces a shared secret that is distinct from message B.
Okay,
The message is like a hint, basically.
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
If I may try to add a bit of context, I think split KEM is basically where you're right at when you take a KEM and the signature and combine them to build something like that. But there's also a way to derive a split KEM.
Yeah, I mean, yes, that is one way to get there, but it's not necessarily the only way to get there, right?
But it's functionality then.
Yeah, fair.
Your authentications and you also transmit the track secret.
Yeah, because what happens now is that because this is taking into consideration the public key, it means that if both parties obtain the same shared secret and established a channel of communication, then they can sort of implicitly authenticate each other. The first party, because that took into consideration public key A, so then it knew that that was their like if they can the same share secret, then they know that they must know the secret associated with the public key, and the same down here. So this sort of gives us exactly the same kind of authentication properties that you get from a non-interrupted key exchange, but while introducing an additional round of communication that you don't get from a regular PKE. And we might hope that what we have works fine, and then we're good. We don't have to do anything extra. We think something very efficient, something very nice. But unfortunately, that's not the situation. And the reason for that is that if we keep exactly everything as it is, then there is a fairly simple attack. Because again, this is a commutative diagram. So the kernel of this isogeny down here is the image of the isogeny up there under psi. Which means that if we have a point of relatively small order that we can access, then this point will also be like we can also, we know that the image of that point will be in the kernel of the isogeny here. And since we have both, it means that if psi is reused across iterations, as it usually is in a split KEM, then the orange party by interacting multiple times with the blue party can recover the image of some small point p under psi up to scalar. And this is not ideal because we know that if we can do this multiple times with 3 different linearly independent points, then we can actually recover psi of p and psi of q without the scaling. And this again is only a small point, but then we can repeat this process multiple times with points of different order until we get the image of psi under like on a sufficiently large torsion base from which then we can recover psi. So in some sense, by keeping psi and keeping psi fixed over multiple iterations, it is possible to slowly extract enough information to recover psi. So this is not long-term secure. And the solution to that is that the only way you can do that is by switching the vertical isogenies to something that doesn't have known degree. So once again, we need to go to the unknown degree setting to give us additional security. But now we can no longer use a higher dimensional representation because we're already using a higher dimensional representation for the top isogeny, and we don't really know how to combine the two things. So the solution is what I call uniside isogenies, which is a slight modification of the bin side isogenies or third side isogenies. I think there is a paragraph there briefly describing this. And the idea is that you start with a point of pretty small order on the, and you want to compute its push forward under, or its sorry, you want to have a way to compute the push forwards of isogenies on the left under the right under phi without knowing phi. And the idea is that you can always reveal the image of this point p under phi up to scalar. And if we do that, then we can compute the isogeny associated with p and its push forward. And that we can always do. It only gives us one option, but that's something we can do. But then we can introduce a second point p prime, and we can do the same thing, revealing under a different scalar. And then if you do that, then we can also compute the isogeny associated with p prime, and it's the isogeny associated with this beta times phi prime, which would be parallel to the first isogenies. But besides that, we can also combine the two and obtain a third isogeny that includes both of them. And the good thing is that if we have t points, then we're gonna be able to compute 2 to the t possible isogenies and their push forwards simply by selecting a binary subset of these points that we want to include in the kernel. And this gives rise to this uniside isogenies that have unknown degree because the degree corresponds precisely to the selection of points that we want to include in the kernel. So one way to represent this is that we can fix a single point R at the beginning, which is sort of given by summing together all these points p prime of small co-prime order. And then the order of this is what we call capital B, which is just the product of at least lambda small primes. And then when we want to generate an isogeny, we generate a secret key, which is just a value b prime such that divides b. So this is basically corresponds to a selection of which small primes we want to include and which ones we do not want to include. And then to compute the isogeny, we simply take the point r and we scale it by b divided by b prime, which gives us exactly the isogeny that we obtain by picking the points that corresponds to these primes and excluding the ones that do not. Okay, so now that we have these isogenies that have a hidden degree, we can plug them in. And so basically this is the same image that you've seen before. We just replace how we compute psi and psi prime. And now we can open this piece of split KEM. And the answer is kind of, in the sense that this gives us exactly what SIDH gave us, in the sense that like this is something that is passively secure, but that this is very not secure against adaptive attacks, because we can easily, like if the attacker is one of the two parties, then they can be maliciously generate points in such a way that they learn something. So this is inherently not secure against active attacks, but we can make it secure by introducing additional checks. And first of all, we can focus on the higher dimensional representation that Alice did. And basically, they receive these 2 points B to B, this image here. And the way they compute this phi prime is that they simply scale by these two values, compute a higher dimensional representation. And what we argue in the paper is that as long as we introduce an additional check, after we recompute the isogeny phi prime, we remap PB and QB under this isogeny, and we check that what we get is exactly PAB and QAB up to scalar, then this is enough to prevent any kind of adaptive attacks against these isogenies. And if we want to make it like nicer and avoid all sorts of possible attacks, we also need to require that the 2 to the a minus q is prime to prevent simple backtracking attacks. So this gives us pretty nice, pretty efficient, because we only need to map a few additional points, a pretty efficient method to validate the isogeny that is used by Alice. On the other hand, providing security against the isogeny computed by Bob, it's somewhat more complicated because, as we said before, the secret really depends on taking this point R and then looking at which subpoints we want to include and which one we do not. So by simply modifying some of this, then we can easily see whether the shared secret is still the same or not, and then get like slowly start the secret. So the main idea is, before in SIDH, this was solved by adding a proof of isogeny knowledge. We showed that these points were honestly generated, and then we're done. And one, that was very expensive, and two, we wouldn't even know how to translate this because we don't really have a proof of isogeny knowledge that allows us to prove correctness of points under an isogeny whose degree is unknown. Like all the proofs that we know invariably leak the degree, so we don't know how to do this. And the solution to do this is that even if this psi is fixed and long term, what we can do is that we just generate an ephemeral psi and the corresponding isogeny, and then we send this to the first person, and we ask it to compute the corresponding isogeny and reveal what would have been the shared secret XAB. And the idea is that if they modify some point to be wrong, if we end up using this point in the ephemeral secret, then it's going to be hard for them to obtain the right shared secret. And this depends on the degree of the point that is being manufactured. So to give us enough security, what we need to do is repeat this process multiple times, where we send these values and ask for the XAB back. And the number of times that we need to run this depends on several factors, including the security parameter, the degrees that we are using in our value R. So the larger, the smaller, like we saw that R, the order of R is a product of at least lambda primes. The larger the smallest prime in there is, the fewer repetitions we need. And this is somewhat better than what we used to have, because in practice for the first security level, we need to repeat this around 12 times, this thing. So compared to the proofs of isogeny knowledge, where we needed more than lambda times. And if we do this enough times, then we can actually show that this prevents the attacks, and these points are honest. And this gives us a way to guarantee that the point RA is correct. So then we can compute psi prime without risking leaking any information about psi. And the reason, but this is still very interactive. So to make this non-interactive, the idea is that rather than querying and waiting to receive back all the XAB's values for like all the 12 times that we repeat this, instead we send both all the sort of queries together with this value already in one go, but we encrypt this under some symmetric encryption scheme where the key is precisely all those values, so that we can guarantee that the other recipient only sees this value if they could generate those all those XABs correctly. And the reason why, I mean, this 3KEM that we obtain is somewhat nice, and it offers the same properties as IDH, but in some sense, precisely because of that, then it's not a particularly nice split KEM, because we still need to repeat this 12 times, and we need to pick a larger prime. So, but the reason why this is interesting is because then you can take this 3KEM and use exactly the same techniques and the same validation technique in an OPRF. That while still not being practical, it does significantly improve from the OPRFs that we currently have, at least from Isogenies. And very quickly, an OPRF is a two-party protocol between a client and a server, where they want to jointly evaluate a PRF function on a key held by the server and on a message chosen by the client, but we want that the the server never learns anything about the message chosen by the client. And this has many applications in different privacy preserving constructions. So what we can do is that we start again from a curve with points P, Q, R, and X, and then we construct our uniside isogeny, and this is the server's public key. And then to evaluate a message, we map this message to an isogeny of degree 2. And then because we want to hide this, because this depends on the message to the server to not see this domain, we took a second isogeny of degree 2 to the A minus Q, so that the composition is precisely what we want. And this is chosen at random. Then we reveal the usual points scaled under some random scalar. Then at this point, the server computes the isogeny psi prime, exactly as in Poke, or as in the previous expression that we've seen, generates multiple ephemeral pairs, and takes all the XABs that is expecting to receive back from the client and encrypts this value symmetrically under that key. And then this is all of this is sent to the client, and if the client is honest, then they should be able to recompute those isogenies up there, obtain all the values XABs, which means that they were able to decrypt this and obtain this value, and from this value obtain this bottom isogeny, from which this middle curve, the codomain of phi m prime, which depends only on the message isogeny and on the secret key, is precisely the output of the OPRF. And we have a implementation of this with some results. This is still, again, far from being great, far from being practical, but it allows us to obtain a bandwidth of less than 30 kilobytes, which is much less than basically any other isogeny-based OPRF or even lattice-based OPRFs. And we also, again, same caveat as before, we have a very inefficient implementation that we can expect to improve at least 10 times, but still this gives us an idea of how things work. And this is still possibly more efficient than any other isogeny based OPRF, because we only need to repeat those squares 12, 13 times compared to basically any other isogeny based OPRF that requires at least lambda repetitions. And it's also, we expect, given this very proof of concept results, to be somewhat competitive with both better than previous isogeny based OPRFs, but also competitive with the lattice based OPRFs based on FHE. Okay, so to quickly sum up, we propose a new framework that allows us to build a new, to build a SLH like commutative diagrams while also using the higher dimensional representations. And then using this framework, we can obtain a PKE that we expect to be pretty efficient in computation times, but also quite compact and possibly even more compact using better parameters. But besides this, we see that this may have several applications. We can obtain a split KEM, we can obtain an OPRF that is significantly improved on what we currently have, and hopefully we can expect to obtain many more constructions. Thank you very much, and I'll be more than happy to take any questions.
I think I'm misunderstanding something with your vertical slide, because your point R has lambda primes.
Yes.
But why couldn't you do a sort of meet in the middle from? Why could you do sort of a meet in the middle at that time from both sides?
Why could you not? Or why could you?
Why can you not? Yeah.
I mean, because the degree of this is still like very large, because if you take lambda primes and you multiply, you get something that is like roughly 800 bits.
Yeah, but there are not that many options, right? So you could take the dual and then.
Yeah, but the thing is that you can only do that on one side, not on both sides, because like when you start from the top, you only have a limited amount of options, but when you start from this side, you don't know where you're coming from, right?
Yeah.
So this severely limits what your meet in the middle can do, because you can build, like, I mean, the idea is that you build your tree, like the pre-computation part of the meet in the middle, starting from the top, because there it's easier, and then you try to guess from the right. But then this doesn't really give you much, like it doesn't really give you much.
Yeah.
I have two questions, but the second is a follow-up on the first. So from what thank you for the first. From what I see, your so both you use test as a method. So is there some specific a few instances that are vulnerable to generalize lollipop attack? And therefore the second question is, if that's so, would there be a way to use a satellite system on call assist to use the attacks on the mechanism?
You mean whether like a lollipop, generalized lollipop attack, you mean something like your silver paper?
That's yeah, that's.
I guess yes, you could do that, but I mean, I haven't thought about it, but like as a general guess, I think if you have one of those, then you should be able to push it forward and still do that. But at the same time, I don't know whether you would want to do it, because in that sense, like that already keeps your PKE, and like whether you push it forward, it's unclear whether you can get something out of it. But if you could, I mean, I think it's technically possible. I don't know if you gain anything from doing that. That was your first question. I'm not sure what the second one was.
Well, it was the first was the gun that if the generals will not work better. If there are some really specific instances where we could apply the generals on the book and get specific part of the secrets, like what happened in the Festa.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Not that we know of, because the fundamental thing is that the secret keys I mean, it depends which variant you're talking about, but like in all the like as long as the degree is unknown, then the logical attacks don't really apply as far as we know, because there is, I mean, they all end up requiring to know the degree. You could use them on the PKE to try to recover the vertical isogenies. But then you have two ways to get out of that. You either generate the basis state deterministically rather than or I mean, if these are like public parameters, if they're included in public key of the first part, then it doesn't really matter, because I mean, even if they were able to run that attack, then they would only obtain the message that was used to be encrypted to that. So like, I mean, it doesn't really like, I mean, it gives the receiver a way to attack the ciphertext, but that's what they're already like decrypting, so it doesn't really make much of a difference.
In terms of the PKE, how does it form like in comparison to like if you just look at that?
Much better, mostly because Festa uses a very large prime. Like the prime Festa is something like 1200 bits. And because you're computing a higher dimensional isogeny of degree roughly 2 to the 600, something like that. This was then improved in QFast and obtaining smaller parameters, both in terms of the prime and degree of the isogeny that you're recomputing. But I'm quite confident this still like outperforms QFast as well, because I think the prime is comparable, but then the isogenies that you're going to compute are smaller, and like the vertical isogenies are smooth and rational, which gives an edge over Festa, because I think one of them is not rational, so you have to kind of compute it a la CGL, and the two-dimensional isogeny that you go to compute is smaller, so it should still outperform Festa.
Why is it called a higher dimensional representation?
That's a good question. I did skip over that. So like, if you open this box and you look inside, then you do get a billion varieties of dimension higher than 1 and isogenies between them, and then it's all like that's why you're talking about higher dimension isogeny or higher dimension representation.
I was a bit curious about these improvements you mentioned about the prime characteristic. How can you fit 2 lambda power of 3 and lambda power of 2 inside this prime of size?
We're getting there. Okay, so because I mean your 2 to the A is roughly lambda bits, your 3 to the B is roughly 2 lambda, so you have 3 lambda that is that, and then your prime X is lambda halves.
Yeah.
So basically by moving roughly lambda bits of 3 to the B to the, well, sorry, maybe one thing that is I didn't mention is that like so you don't need 3, like the second parameter to be actually a power of 3. It can be anything that is moved.
Oh, yeah.
Because you're
using
vertical
power of
isogeny.
2 as well.
Huh?
Yeah, so you're using power of 2 as well then?
The power of 2 stays fixed, yes. But the 3 to the B can be replaced by anything that is moved.
Oh, yeah, okay, so you kind of lose performances.
Yeah, I mean, this is literally something that we found yesterday afternoon in like 15 minutes. I don't remember what was the smoothness found. It was 2 to the 11, something like that. Do you remember?
You ran the search for 2 to the 16 or so, but it was 1 in minutes. I guess it's gonna be at least as good as this 1 for design.
Yeah, sure. I thought you had the same.
No. Yeah, I mean, this is literally like you know, something we came up with like yesterday, so it's very much unclear. Like,
No, but as soon as you shift from power 3 to the corresponding, it makes sense.
So I guess the hope is that like the smaller prime will compensate.
hopefully, yeah. I mean, I guess also there is a bit of a trade-off because then you get smaller, like the ciphertext and the public keys are smaller because your prime is smaller, but it's a bit slower, so there is a trade-off there depending on the.
Thanks for the talk. I missed the point of the first half because I went to find out.
Yeah. The idea is that like, so I mean, this second attacks like all relied on sort of providing torsion points that were manufactured, like they were like maliciously generated. But in this case, we're not doing anything malicious with the points. The thing is that like your degree q times 2 to the a minus q might have a small factor, say like a factor of 5, like 5 divides that, right? Which means that there is a point p of order 5 that lies in the kernel of that isogeny. And which also means that because you know the kernel of this isogeny down here, you also know that point, like the point of order 5 that lies in this kernel. You're the orange person attacking the blue person. So you have a point of order 5 up there, and you know the image under psi of this point of order 5 up to scalar. And then you can repeat this like 3 times with 3 points that are not linearly independent. Like your attack on like the second adaptive attack on SIDH. You know, once you have 3 linearly independent points and their images up to scalar, then you can combine them to basically remove the scalars.
The basis was fixed.
Huh?
The basis was fixed.
But the basis doesn't get into the consideration. Because the points, sorry, maybe check, this P is not that P, this is just a point. Sorry, my bad. It's a different color. I mean, these points that you're using here will be defined over an extension field.
But how do you get the answer?
Because you know that you have a representation of both phi and phi prime. So if there is a point of small order in external, then you can extract it.
Okay, there are no further questions, and thank you again for a good time.